Good morning and welcome to our panel on emotional AI in smart cities. I'm Lachlan Urquhart. I'm a lecturer in technology law at the University of Edinburgh. And this panel this morning has been organised by Hiroshi Miyashita and Chuo University, and it's part of our jointly funded UK Economic and Social Research Council funded and Japanese Science and Technology Agency project looking at emotional AI in smart cities. So I'd say if you're interested in following up on some of the discussions afterwards, to have a look at the Emotional AI Lab website as well for some of our activities. We have a range of really exciting presentations this morning, exploring some of the Japanese and European perspectives on this topic. So each presenter today will have 10 minutes to talk through the presentation. And if you have questions that you want to pose to the panel, please do post them in the box. And if it's to a specific panel member, please make that part of your question as well. So I'm going to quickly just introduce our panel members and give you a very brief overview of what they're going to talk about, and then we'll get started on the talks. So first up, we have Kentaro Yu, who is a General Manager at Revolution Division at ZMP Inc. Kentaro is in charge of autonomous robot cars and robot data platforms, and he sometimes demonstrates his robot car in Japanese TV programs. And he's going to present an overview of the use case of robotic automobiles in smart cities, and particularly looking at some of the data collected by ZMP robots, and discuss some of the things around data minimization strategies. This is then going to be responded to by Hiroshi Miyashita, who's an associate professor of law at the Faculty of Policy Studies at Chuo University in Japan. And he specialises in constitutional law and information law. Prior to this, he served for the Office of Personal Information Protection in the Cabinet Office. And he's going to be looking at some of the recent Japanese supercity legislation and some of the emergences of emotion and face detection in vehicles, and touch on topics around data protection by design and some recent case law that we've seen from around the world, for example, around the TomTom and German dashcam case. So that will be a really interesting discussion there. We will then have Konstantina Vemou, who is based at the European Data Protection Supervisor, where she joined a year ago as a technology and security officer. She has a background of over 10 years' experience in security and data protection positions in the Hellenic public sector, and she's going to provide us with a European perspective on facial and emotion recognition, including an overview of how they'll be covered by GDPR and some of the responses that we might have in law, for example, in data protection impact assessments and transparency. And we will then move on to Paul Breitbarth, who's a privacy lawyer from the Netherlands, and he currently serves as the Director for EU Policy and Strategy at TrustArc's office in The Hague in the Netherlands. He's also a visiting fellow and member of the advisory board at Maastricht University's European Centre for Privacy and Security. And he's going to provide a Dutch perspective on particularly looking at recent data protection investigations in smart cities, and also looking at emergence of intelligent cameras in the Netherlands, and thinking about accountability challenges here and how we demonstrate accountability for these types of technologies. And we'll conclude with Dr. Lena Podoletz, who is a research fellow in emotional AI in smart cities at the University of Edinburgh, who's interested in algorithmic bias and transparency and the use of algorithmic decision-making systems. And she's going to look at some of the applications for emotional AI in policing and criminal justice, and trying to give some historical context as to how these systems have emerged and some of the current state of the art, for example, in predictive policing in smart cities. So having given an overview there, I'll now pass over to Kentaro, who will open up the panel. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kentaro Ryu, General Manager of ZMP in Japan, Tokyo. And actually, I'm not a specialist of the field of this conference, but I'm going to introduce very interesting services we are doing in Japan, say in central Tokyo. So let's start my presentation. Okay, can you show the presentation, please? Thank you. Okay, my presentation theme is autonomous driving robot. And originally, our ZMP have been developed autonomous driving cars, like a taxi or bus, something like that. And okay, next slide, please. And as you know, this kind of autonomous driving taxi services need a kind of very long-term business side, like maybe 5 years, 10 years. So, or to survive or this kind of business world, we are trying to find out the kind of early commercialization field. The one is a private area, and autonomous driving in private area, such as airports, test cars, something like that, where the traffic regulation is not applied. And another field is a low-speed area, even on the public road. Okay, so if the robot goes, autonomous car or autonomous robot goes very low speed, the risk of the accident is very low compared to the high-speed car, right? So, okay, next slide. So in this low-speed field, we're doing kind of sharing services. Okay, this is our robot with autonomous driving. Please look at this. This looks very cute, right? This robot has this kind of eyes, and this robot can say something using AI, like "Hello" or "How are you," something like that, and called Lachlan. And this Lachlan has this little tablet on the in front of the seat, and the customer can ride this seat and just press the tablet and press the destination where the customer want to go. Then after the pressing the tablet, you don't need to do anything. Just autonomous driving robot will give you a ride to your destinations. Okay, and this robot, okay, next. Okay. And this robot is recognized as electric wheelchair in Japanese law. And the speed is less than 6 kilometers per hour. And the robot's eyes and the voice communications. So passenger, no need to drive. Okay? And automatically this robot avoid the obstacle and sometimes stops if some risk is near the robot. And drivers, the customers need to drive, but autonomous driving basically. But sometimes autonomous driving doesn't work. The remote operator can remotely monitoring and control anytime he wants. And this is a service map in central Tokyo. And a customer can register and can be a registered member and paying about 400 bucks per month and or $3.6 per 10 minutes. And as this service is very similar to bike share and car sharing services. So some station of the Rakudo is in the town, and the customer can go about 1.5 kilometer diameters areas. And a customer can use the Rakudo for two purposes. The first purpose is going to some destinations like restaurants or hospitals or supermarket and coming back to the station again. And another one is the walk around. Just walk around. Rider Rakudo and just sit and enjoying movie. So to the destination moves from the station to the destination and go back to the station, right? And the walking around purpose is just go around. And during driving, the customer can look around or playing a smartphone apps, something like that. Okay, next please. So this is some figures. Like a customer can book the Rakudo using smartphone apps. Then we have about 300 customers right now using 5 Rakudos in this small town. Actually, the kids loves this robot. Very like so many kids is as a customer. So this is an overview of our services, but this conference is a kind of CDPD. So I'm going to talk about the data handling policy using this Lachlan services. Actually, we are collecting some data. In the phase of registration by customers, um, of course, we need some data about the customer, name, phone number, email, password for booking, and we need to support them. And age is using for this Lachlan is especially a very good service for elderly people. So if the customer is elderly people, we sometimes give them a special program for them. So we need some age information and a credit card for payment. And in the operational phase, the Lachlan has 6 cameras on the robot. So using these cameras, a remote operator always monitoring the camera images. And sometimes the operator can control this robot from the remotely. And a stereo camera means 2 cameras in front on the front of the robot. And this camera is used for traffic light recognition. So always looking around and finding a traffic light. Okay? And 2D, 3D laser sensor called LiDAR is set on the robot and utilized for localization and obstacle detections. This is a figure. 3D LiDARs is top of the robot, and the stereo cameras here, and the 6 camera, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 4 camera around view cameras, and 2D LiDARs is on the foot area of the robot and detecting obstacles in front of the robot. Okay, and through these cameras, we call the RoboHi cloud systems. The remote operator can monitor anytime he wants, and sometimes control stop button and using this kind of a game controller and control this robot remotely. This is our remote control center in our office and controlling about 10 robots from here. So, but based on our policy of data minimization, we are dealing with the data like these policies. Around view camera image not recorded at all. And front camera images are not recorded neither. But also, but of course, if engineer want to tune up the systems, sometimes it's recorded, but we don't need this data for marketing or something like that. So just for safety or engineering purposes. And about the LiDAR data, laser sensor data, always recording for improving the safety functions. But this laser sensor data from these data, nobody can recognize who is who. So this could not be can't be personal data. But in the near future, while doing our services, Metropolitan Police Department or a police agency may require us in the future all the camera image to record for safety evidences. So it could be kind of issues of data privacy. And of course, we are thinking to utilize these personal data for marketing, but we are still under discussion in this kind of purposes. And at the end of my slide presentation, I talked about only for Rakudo or of a mobility robot, but this robot has a brother, such as a delivery robot called Delido and a security robot called Patoro. So these robots are based on the same technology and the sensor configuration. So data is collecting from the camera and laser data, but we are doing the services based on the same policy of data minimization now. Okay, that's my presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to ask anything. Maybe Mr. Miyashita can help my.
Thank you very much, Kentaro. So we're going to take questions for the end for a sort of panel discussion. So if anyone does have any questions, please do pop them into the box on the that you can, and I'll pick them up. And next we will move on to Hiroshi, please.
Yes, thank you, Lachlan. I will briefly introduce the Japanese discussions regarding emotional AI in smart cities. Let me first share the state of art of emotion predicting technologies. Slide, please. According to the NHK Public Broadcasting TV program in Japan, last year they introduced emotion predicting, I wouldn't say emotion detecting, emotion predicting technologies from SNS, social networking services, sentences and phrases in the recruiting services. Some companies collected such information together with the factual information such as histories of attending recruiting seminars. Profiling is no longer a technical tool to identify an individual, but an emotion itself of a human being. Another example can be seen in the below. If you look at the bottom of the left side of the bottom, from a Japanese company of User Local, which is to predict individuals' emotion based on sentences, voices, and images. I wrote in their services, personal information protection in smart cities, and they found my sentences as very strong emotion of joy according to their AI analytics. And if you look at my face, they also predicted me as a male with joy. To be honest, I remember I was very nervous at that time of being taking photos in this situation. So next slide, please. So let me now move on to the Japanese situation. The debate we should focus on today is that such emotional AI technologies are applied in smart cities in Japan. Mr. Ryu's example is an excellent one in smart cities. In Japan, the government just passed a smart super city legislation last year in 2020 in order to promote smart technologies in 10 local cities across Japan. During the parliamentary debate, some concerns were, of course, raised for a surveillance city. But the Japanese government repeatedly stated they will not collect personal data in a national central database. They were, of course, were conscious about complying with data protection law. Instead, the government plans to collect the personal data in smart cities throughout the data linkage platform, which is obliged to comply with data protection law. Next slide, please. So these are the overview of the smart city project. The main target can be seen in this slide. Namely, smart technologies are expected to use the 9 fields, including administrative procedures, logistics, and most importantly, mobilities, such as Mr. Ryu's robotic services. Most practically, facial recognition images can be used to predict emotions for security or marketing purposes. Some Japanese companies are using camera images in shopping mall as detecting gender, identifying the repeated customers, and also predicting the emotion of the coming individuals. The next slide, please. So the immediate reaction to the emotion detecting technologies can be demonstrated by the famous Oakland City Ordinance in the United States in order to ban the facial recognition technologies. In the letter recommending the ban, the Council of President wrote, facial recognition technologies runs the risk of making Oakland resident less safe as misidentification of individual could lead to misuse of false inoculation, minority-based prosecution. So the biggest concern is about accuracy. So in other words, we have not yet seen any evidence so far that technologies can accurately recognize or detect the emotion of human beings at this moment. So we need smart data protection law for smart cities. In order to realize this, human in the loop or human-centric notion is not just a slogan, but the concrete idea to implement and enforce a data protection law. However, there are unsolved questions regarding data protection law in smart cities. First, consent. The Japanese government repeatedly mentioned consent is very important for the smart cities services. Actually, the consent is one of the effective and lawful tools for processing personal data in small cities. However, in the context of smart cities, opt-out consent means that leaving the city you live. The classical work by Professor Albert Hirschman wrote that exit take alone only predicts the warning sign of decline, but such exit in a smart city does not work well. So again, consent is extremely important, but this is not the decisive factor to realize a smart city. So we need to, a second important element, we need to identify an individual invisible danger of data. In a city with emotion predicting technologies, we must recognize the sensitivity of human life in way in not seen, as Professor Andrew Maxtace wrote. Sensitivity may include facial recognition cameras, and also smart meter can recognize what time you wake up and what time you go to bed, and also that your guides or your health condition may be recognized by wearable devices. So our experience proved that data can often used for good services. However, our experience shows the misuse of personal data, even in the smart cities, is also a realistic, is also a reality. So the question for us today is to visualize the possible risks and dangers around the corners in the smart cities. There are already useful tools under the data protection laws, such as data protection impact assessment, accountability tools, and also data protection by design. And there's one symbolic case coming from the highest court of Federal Court of Germany, where they, in the case of a dash cam in May 2018, where the court held that the permanent recording through the dash cam in autonomous mobile or normal cars may violate the right to information self-determination in the German context. So we need to visualize the risks and also the dangers around the privacy. Finally, cities and the municipality is the closest democracy for the people. So any smart city must respect the democratic procedure and democratic governance. And data in smart cities should serve for the people. In other words, data of the people, by the people, for the people.
That was great. Thank you very much, Hiroshi, for your really interesting talk there and the outline of the different issues that are emerging. Thank you. So that was ahead of schedule as well. So we will move on to Konstantina Vemou from the EDPS, who will give us an overview of some of the issues from the European perspective, as I mentioned. So over to you, Konstantina.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's put on my slides, please. So I will try to build on Mr. Miyashita's presentation and go on a little bit further to explain the main risks of facial recognition and mainly facial emotion recognition. And I will try to explain how we approach it in Europe. So a little hint, our biggest concern is not the accuracy, but the proportionality question. Let's start. So you have already seen there are many examples and many use cases for emotional AI in the smart cities. We have to understand that they are really useful in providing safety and security and high quality services to citizens. However, we must not forget that these are two highly intrusive technologies and they call for special requirements of personal data protection. So as regards the European law, I can say they are both covered under GDPR. They do process personal data. Especially facial recognition requires even stricter privacy safeguards as it processes biometric data for identification of people. So this is identified and defined, let's say, as a special category of personal data in GDPR, and it has to follow stricter legal requirements under Article 9 of the GDPR. And in this notion, someone would say facial emotion recognition is not covered by the strict rules of GDPR. However, we also need to remember that in sometimes processing of facial expressions can lead to inference of sensitive information such as health data. So we still have data protection requirements that are really strict. Also, we must not forget that processing one's emotions touches the core of people's most private data, and this is the core of the human dignity, so it's really a risk to a fundamental right. Okay, so great. Next slide is on. So I will briefly take you through the main risks of these two technologies. The first risk, it's highly understandable and easily understandable, is the lack of transparency and control over personal data processing. So you can understand facial images and video can be captured anywhere and in a remote manner. So it is not really transparent to the data subject when their personal data are captured, which system or application will process them, for which purposes, and for how much time, and even if it will be aggregated to other data about them, and who the controllers will be. As a result, the data subjects are not in the position to exercise their rights for information stored about them. And also, in cases where we have the legal basis of consent, they may not be able to express their consent when this is necessary, or even worse, they may not be able to withdraw it when they wish to. Another really important risk is the lack of data accuracy. So in facial recognition technology, the quality of the input, the camera resolution, the angle, the light of the image, and of course the algorithm, they can have a huge impact on the accuracy of the outcome. We have some examples in the news from the US where persons were wrongly identified by facial recognition algorithms and they were arrested based on these false positive results. There is, for example, the case of Niger Parks, which you can find on the news. But especially for facial emotion recognition, one cannot be sure about the accuracy of the outcome, as facial expressions, as already Mr. Miyashita said, they can slightly vary among individuals. They are dependent on socio-cultural context. They may mix different emotional states that are experienced also at the same time. They may have a different meaning if paired with contextual clauses. Just imagine yourself and your facial expression when you say something in a sarcastic way. And of course, the technology of facial emotion recognition does not explain the trigger of the emotions. So you cannot tell if it's a thought of something happening now, of a thought of a recent or past event. So inference based solely on facial expressions may lead to wrong impressions. And of course, we have examples of biased algorithms. So both the accuracy of the algorithm and the selection of the training test can play an important role in discriminating across different groups. I will point you to the Fundamental Rights Agency reports. It has been shown that some facial recognition algorithms had higher false positive results for certain racial groups or even for women. And in the emotion recognition field, there is a study by Ru at the end of 2019, which showed an algorithm for emotion recognition was biased, and it assigned more negative emotions to faces of people of color than to other faces. And what was even more important and more dangerous is that wherever there was ambiguity, the same algorithm would score people of color as angrier than the others. So one can imagine this this could have a great impact if such a bias would be applied in cases of safeguarding public security. Imagine using facial emotion recognition technology to concerts, sport events, or even airports to spot potential terrorists. And another risk I have already hinted you about is inferring special categories of personal data. So based on the use of each technology, one can infer special categories of personal data such as political opinions and health data. For instance, one can infer psychiatric and neurological disorders by lack of expressions, or even depression of someone. And such data, we all understand that if used in the context of healthcare, they can assist in predicting and timely treating a patient, and this is a really good outcome. However, they are really sensitive personal data, and they could end in the hands of non-authorized entities. So imagine employers or issuers companies that they may use them against the data subject's will. And last but not least, we have a risk of profiling and manipulating people. So we have to remember that these two technologies, especially the facial emotion recognition technology, can be further used to create profiles of people. The risk lies in the fact that the data subject is not aware of this type of profiling and targeting, and they might feel uncomfortable if they found out about it. And there are further implications that can occur if we do errors in profiling them. So we may profile people based on inferences solely based on the association with a certain group of people that experience the same emotions. So this could go really in a wrong way. Apart from that, we should not forget that knowing the individual's emotions can make it easier to manipulate them. So imagine yourself in a store in a really vulnerable position. You may not be doing the rational choices when you buy things. And also we need to remember that the use of surveillance technology could cause behavioral changes in case a person is aware that they are exposed to this technology. So one can imagine how this could shape citizens' actions in the public and what chilling effect this could have to a society. Okay, and let's see how we approach it in Europe. To be honest, it's no different than any other technologies. In any other type of processing, any other type of technology, the first step is to analyze the necessity and proportionality of the use. So before you get to the technicalities of identifying which is the right algorithm, which are the safeguards or the right data set to test to train the algorithm, you first need to answer the proportionality question. So you have to understand and explain, is really the use of biometric technology necessary? Is it the most suitable solution for solving the problem we aim to solve? And apart from that, is there a valid legal basis for the use of the technology? If you are not familiar with this type of exercise, we at the DPS have a really helpful checklist. It's the EDPS Necessity Toolkit. You can find it on our website. I have also put the URL here. And if you answer and go away from the proportionality question, then you can start thinking of accountability and transparency, both on the algorithms and, of course, the distinct use of the technology. Then you need to perform a data protection impact assessment, and this would answer what new problems or risks are introduced by the use case of this technology, and it could guide the selection of the necessary safeguards to keep the data subjects both aware and in control of their personal data. And the last note from me, and of course from GDPR, is to always keep the human in the loop, to have an oversight, so the technology cannot and never have an impact on the individual. A human needs to be able to reproduce the same result when a decision affecting really the data subject is based on such a result. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Konstantina. That was a really great overview of a number of the different issues and relevant areas of GDPR that we need to be thinking about in this debate. So thank you for that. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on to Paul next. So yeah, if we could just start with Paul, please. And I've noticed we're getting some more questions coming in, which is great. So we'll pick up on some of those towards the end.
Thank you, Lachlan, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy Data Protection Day, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel. Thank you to Hiroshi for the invite to join you here today. I'd like to discuss the situation here in the Netherlands a little, but also go into some of the broader issues as also raised to some extent by Konstantina. Maybe at the first big public event here in the Netherlands where people actually realized there was such a thing as emotional AI was a few years ago when the Dutch railways announced that they would place new advertising equipment on the platforms at train stations. Digital advertising, including cameras, and those cameras would monitor who was going around, and we were assured that they wouldn't record anything, but the cameras would only look at whether people were standing still, looking at the advertisement, and how they were liking the advertisement or not. And by those viewings, those analysis, they could follow up and show different kinds of advertisement, show special promotions and such. And that led to a big outcry here in the Netherlands because a lot of people didn't like that kind of surveillance. And still, it is also what is happening in a lot of government-funded projects and government-led projects throughout the country, most notably in the city of Eindhoven, which is a field lab for smart city developments. There is a whole new residential area that was built as part of those smart city developments, also as part of a Horizon 2020 study. And what you see there is that they are trying to build what they call a smart urban space, where urban gardening and rainwater management and things like that are governed by technology and by use of AI, where smart mobility is also being used to make transport more effective, including transport as a service, mobility as a service. And those are all developments where you can say, well, that is actually going to be pretty useful, especially in crowded cities going forward, reduce waste, improve space, and improve the quality of living. Elsewhere in the city, they are also running projects using different kinds of artificial intelligence, and there they are actually using emotional AI. Most notably at Stratums Eind, which is the bar area in Eindhoven, they have been running some pilots for a couple of years. This area is notorious for bar fights, especially on Saturday nights when people get too drunk, at least pre-corona. All the bars have been closed here for quite a while, but they were notorious for that and trying to find solutions. And one of the things that's trialed is adaptive lighting. So adaptive lighting being used to change the atmosphere in the streets to have more light when it is crowded or when there is a risky situation, but also using all kinds of detections. So depending on how many people are in the bars, how many people have parked their car at car storage nearby, the weather that is there on a given day, the time of the day, but also using lots of microphones to listen for the sounds in the street, breaking glass, people screaming and shouting. And all of that could be used to adapt the lighting, but also to send notifications to the police who were on site so that they could immediately intervene at a given location. And in some of the news reports on the first outcomes of these projects, it was mentioned that the entrepreneurs around the bar area were very much aware and they cooperated and they were very happy, but because indeed they saw the nuisance go down. At the same time, the people behind the project also recognized that a lot of the visitors of the area had no idea of what was going on. And that is exactly where you get one of those problems from a data protection perspective. And I think this is also one of the reasons why the Dutch Data Protection Authority has started an exploratory investigation in the fall of 2019. It is still ongoing. Into all kinds of smart city developments. And since we don't have the results yet, I can't comment in detail, of course, on what they found, but they did give an interim report with a series of recommendations. And those align pretty much with what Konstantina also mentioned just now. First of all, they stress very much the importance of completing thorough and good DPIAs, data protection impact assessments, and already concluding that it is very likely that there would be residual risk when doing a DPIA for these kind of projects, which means that a prior consultation with the Data Protection Authority would be required. And that is important because timelines for these kind of projects need to foresee the time that is required to complete the prior notification, which can be at least 14 weeks. They also need to include citizens in their assessments. We all know that there is a provision in Article 35 saying, well, ideally you involve data subjects or their representatives in the process of an impact assessment. Here, the Data Protection Authority basically says, if you don't do that, then probably we will not accept the DPIA as it is. And also very important, make sure that there is a clear division between controllers and processors, between government and private sector partners, so that it is clear who is responsible for which part of these kind of projects. And that brings us to the key question when looking at emotional AI in smart cities, at least from my perspective, and that is accountability. At TrustArc, I work a lot on various accountability issues, and I think this is a very interesting new angle to look at, because how do you deal with legal basis? How do you indeed deal with all those risks and mitigate any residual risk that might exist? How do you deal with transparency? Because just putting a sign up in the street, oh yeah, we are using emotional AI here, maybe with a QR code, is that sufficient to truly inform people? If even the people behind such a project, as we saw in Eindhoven, recognize that most visitors to the area have no idea what kind of data is being used, and it is very, very intrusive data, looking at your emotions, looking at your location, would you really want all of that just to be done with a sign and a QR code, or do we need to come up with more innovative ways to inform people? Maybe use that same Bluetooth or Wi-Fi tracking technology to also send notifications and provide an immediate web link. I'm just naming a random possibility. And how to deal with the individual rights, how to deal with, for example, a right of access. If you have no name or no other contact details to rely upon, can you then just send in a picture and do facial recognition scanning to find all the information that was captured about you? So even though smart AI and emotional AI in smart cities could have very positive influences on our society, there are also a lot of risks from the data protection perspective. And then I'm not even talking about the fundamental rights approach, that indeed people may be nudged into doing things that they don't want to do or being into who they don't want to be. Let me leave it at that for the introduction, and I'm looking forward to the further conversation.
Thank you, Paul. That was another great overview of the issues from the Dutch perspective. So yeah, thank you for that. And we will conclude with a presentation from Lena, discussing some of the criminal justice-focused applications of emotional AI. So over to you, Lena.
Thank you. I see my video has quite a bit of lagging, so I might just turn off my video and maybe I'll just stick with the audio for now. I think probably that's the best. So basically, the topic I would like to introduce today is the relationship between crime and emotional AI technology. And I think it is an interesting question to ask, why is it time to discuss it now? But I think just the previous presentation showed what a potential use for the police's perspective could be of such technologies. And of course, to the best of our knowledge, currently no such technologies are widely used in the realm of law enforcement or criminal justice, at least not in the European Union. But as we saw, these technologies are under very rapid development, and as we also saw, their use in other areas of life, such as recruitment or advertising, is becoming more and more widespread. And actually, there was a prediction from 2018 that by 2022, 10% of personal devices will have emotional AI capabilities. And of course, we have yet to see whether this prognosis becomes reality or not, but it is definitely interesting. And the previous presentation showed how rapidly technologies are developing. And of course, once a particular text, such as recognition of emotion based on facial expression, is deemed reliable by the public and it is becoming a part of their everyday life in the private sphere, it will become a very pressing issue to determine whether it should and could be used in the public sector as well. And of course, once that happens, the applications within enforcement and criminal justice system will likely become a part of that discussion. So I think it's better to have this discussion sooner rather than later. And so, and of course, just a little repetition from the history of criminological theories and criminalistics is that the use of biometric data has been present in it since the late 19th century. So, of course, it would not be without precedent to make such attempts again with the deployment of emotional AI technologies. And of course, the use of machine learning in general in law enforcement and criminal justice is not science fiction anymore, because we can mention many current examples for this, from the field of crime prediction to the offender risk assessment, such as the Compass system, which became very well known and infamous for being a really biased system when it came to assessments about certain offenders. And we all know CCTV cameras and use of data in policing is also a reality, and it is very easy to see how technology can be doing or the use of databases and social media platforms, for example. But all these bring many concerns, such as Okay.
Right, okay. So are they not hearing at all?
Sorry?
Right, what's the norm here? Do you normally, if that's the case, do you not proceed? Okay. Okay. I mean, it's been clear at my end, but obviously that's not necessarily representative for the audience. I mean, Lena, do you have some key points you could maybe just get over in a shorter period of time, and maybe at least then we'll get them into discussion? Is there maybe sort of a couple of points you want to pull out, and then we can move to the panel? So is that possible? Okay. Okay, Lena, are you there?
Yes, I am. I am trying to speak right now.
So David, yeah, I think maybe if Lena's connection's gone, then we'll just have to move to the panel discussion. Yeah, okay. I think we're having some issues in hearing you, Lena. So we'll maybe need to move to the panel and hopefully bring in some of those perspectives. Yeah, it keeps cutting out. Hello, David?
Okay.
Oh. Okay. Okay. Okay, Lena, we'll have one last try, and if we can't hear you this time, we'll move into the panel.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So just quickly, I wanted to over.
Okay, David, I think we'll have to just go to the panel. I don't think we can keep trying, so maybe I have to cut, unfortunately, Lena. Okay, sorry, Lena. Oh, okay, so am I back live now? Okay. Okay, so sorry everyone. We've had some issues with some technical issues with Lena's connection. So unfortunately, we're going to go straight into the panel now. But hopefully, you know, if there are questions that want to pick up on some of the criminal justice dimensions, then we can bring that into the discussion. So we've had quite a number of questions coming through, and we have one provocative question from Gilad Rosner, who's saying, I think it was in response to Konstantina's talks, maybe Konstantina wanted to pick up on this point, that isn't consent an impossible goal for city residents in dealing with emotional AI? So, you know, he sort of talks about, you know, the challenges that might exist in terms of meaningfully obtaining consent in a recordable way or a sort of legally valid way in terms of GDPR. So I just wondered if you maybe wanted to pick up on that point there, Konstantina.
Yes, thank you very much. This is a really interesting question, and really thank you for bringing this topic up. Let me first start by saying we do believe that consent could only be the legal basis for private companies. So if you have a public authority acting on behalf of public interest, then we have a different scenario, and we would need a clear legal basis for that. And so in scenarios where private companies use the consent of users or of data subjects to apply facial recognition or facial emotion recognition, yes, we need to find innovative ways to ensure they are really aware of both when the technology is applied on them and also what happens with their data afterwards. So we really have to work on that, and we have to find, as Paul already said, really innovative ways to ensure that they are always both aware and in control of their data.
Thank you, Konstantina. Does anyone else from the panel want to come in on this point? No? If not, I think we've got a few other really stimulating questions here. So there's one from Lorenzo B, who's kind of picking up on this issue of the disconnect from the models of emotional state versus how people are actually feeling, and he poses the question around the sort of cross-cultural differences as well in terms of how emotions could perhaps be interpreted. So he's asking, what are the risks of bias in emotional AI due to the subjective nature of emotions, and can it be standardized? So I think this would be interesting, perhaps, to get perspectives from different panel members, maybe Kentaro from the technical perspective and from the legal perspective as well, what sorts of challenges that might raise. So I'll open this one up to the panel as a whole, please.
Well, then maybe I'll start. I think there is a whole range of risks, and one of them already mentioned by Carolina before, on recognizing people's emotions. I think that the only proper way to solve that is to have a very international team with members of all kinds of backgrounds in place when you are developing these kind of algorithms, because everybody has their own bias. That is just the way people work. Also the way people's minds work. You recognize people who look alike you much more easily than people who have a different cultural background. So if you really want to do this, I think you need a cross-diverse group of people to develop it. The foundational question is, of course, should you want to do all of this, and should you want to use all these facial recognition and emotion technologies? Isn't that just going too far into a direction that we shouldn't want?
Yeah, I think the point about, perhaps like in the white paper, the AI white paper, around making more transparency around, what data has this been trained on, would perhaps address some of those concerns as well. Does anyone else want to come in on this question?
May I?
Yeah, of course, yes, please.
Well, I would like to add on what Paul already said. We first need to think if we really want to go that path, to walk that path. If we do, we also have to ensure that we have multiple sources of information, so you cannot base an opinion or a profiling decision about someone only based on their on what their facial expressions or what their voice says and reveals, because of course there are places in this world where there is a different culture. People may express more or may express differently in other areas. So if you do not have algorithms that are built based on these differences, then of course we will have bias. And an example of impact someone could have, it could be to deprive them of a certain service or of a certain right, just because we think they're thinking or feeling something else. This is mainly what we want to think. Do we really want to go along this path?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think there's some good points there. Does anyone else in the panel want to come in before I move on to the next question?
Maybe I can give you one example of the Japanese business culture. When we meet for the first time in a business meeting, we don't smile. I think smiling is a rude and do not respect each other. So, but in the context of a European, probably the US context, you smile at each other for the first time in a business meeting.
Yes,
it's a good lesson to remember, Hiroshi.
There. Sorry, my connection is also. Okay, hopefully you can all hear me. My connection's similarly having a few issues here, but I wanted to pick up on a question that had been raised by Laura Dreschler. I think it's quite interesting in thinking about contexts in which emotion sensing might occur, and she's raising the question about the challenges of transparency and how, perhaps there's more a need to provide information to individuals when a decision is actually being made about someone's emotional state. as far as I understand it, in real time, from our comment, and thinking beyond perhaps more general information obligations, but to perhaps those actual specific decisions that are being made in that moment. And she raises in particular, how are discussions around transparency and emotion sensing being raised in Japan. So perhaps, again, Hiroshi maybe wants to come in first, and then we can open it up to the panel more widely.
Yes, could you summarize a question again? I wasn't able to hear well.
I'm sorry, my connection's not been great. It was mainly just around some of the debates around transparency and emotion sensing in Japan.
Okay. Yes, but again, there is no, according to the European standard, we need to prove and demonstrate the logic involved in autonomous processing, automated processing of personal data. But such a requirement, there is no such requirement under the Japanese data protection law. In other words, there is no profiling requirements under the Japanese law. So there is no strict transparency requirements, which is equivalent to the European standards in my understanding. But I think Mr. Ryu's robot has been very transparent where the camera is and which camera is recording, and the user can choose, and the recording camera is only for the purpose of security and safety reason. So I think Mr. Ryu will add something about the transparency of his robot.
Thank you. Mr. Ryu?
Well, actually, the camera is, of course, only for the security purposes so far. And one function I didn't mention about the camera, and of course, the camera is recognizing the human faces, but the camera is not identifying who is who. So we are using only for security and a kind of communication with pedestrians around the robot. Like if the camera recognizes the faces, I just say, hello, how are you? And not record anything about it. So that's our function of my robot.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Mr. Ryu. So just to, unfortunately, one of the questions has dropped off, but it was quite an interesting one for Konstantina around the issues of when inferences are being made about not just someone's emotional state, but about perhaps their, criminality. We've seen some of these studies that have come out in recent months, which have been trying to kind of use facial data to somehow predict someone's likelihood of being engaging in criminal behaviour, and some of those questions where there's obvious questions of accuracy there, and just the fact that the inferences being made in the first place are potentially very harmful. And it was just pointing to, from your perspective on from GDPR or the Law and Justice Data Protection Directive, if there's anything that can be done to deal with those kinds of examples and uses of this type of technology. So it's just if you had any thoughts on that particular point.
Well, I would say that first of all, my mind goes to all the articles related to people objecting to processing their personal data or gaining access to what information are stored and processed about them, so they could have also access to the outcome of the algorithms. So they would be able to access the basis of what all these effects, let's say, or all the impacts they have are based on. However, I still have to go a little step back. So we have to see through data protection impact assessments, and of course, answering the proportionality question, if we really are in a good and solid ground to go to predictive policing and applying algorithms to decide on someone's criminality or not. These are really sensitive issues.
Absolutely. And it's a shame that Lena's connection's dropped off, because I'm sure she could add to that.
I think
I'm aware we've only got a few minutes left.
if you could hear me, I'm actually here, but...
Oh, perfect. Oh, that's great. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Lena?
Yeah, I think I'll just turn off my video again. Sorry, I couldn't hear the question, because actually when the question was read, I was in a different room. So could you read me the question, please? I could.
It was just about. It was about dealing with the challenges of some of these studies which have come out in recent times of trying to use, facial data, biometric data to predict criminality. And I know in some of your work you've looked at maybe some of the historical aspects. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, historically, it seems like there is absolutely no evidence that you can predict criminality based on any type of physiological characteristic. I think now with certain types of biosocial theories, there is some very, very limited evidence that certain physiological traits, but not external, but more along the lines of genes, for instance, they can be a very, very, very minor contributing factor, but it's essentially completely admissible when if you look at the big context of the causes of crime. So basically crime is caused by societal and structural causes, criminal behavior, that is, and I think the any kind of biological factor is completely insignificantly small. So predicting crime based on biometric traits is as of now, there is absolutely zero evidence that can actually happen. Now the other angle to look at it is predicting, and one thing I wanted to talk about is real-time crime prediction or real-time crime identification based on behavioral cues or verbal cues. These are the two main experimental directions right now, but as of now, none of these technologies are in real-life use. And based on the studies and the experiment results I've seen, they don't seem quite reliable as of now. For example, even if the algorithmic decision-making system could recognize a fight, it's not very likely it would be able to distinguish between a staged fight and the real fight. So that is, of course, a question of accuracy. But I think one of the only technologies that is actually in use is based on the quite controversial vibroimage technology, which is basically I think it uses microfacial expressions to try to determine certain types of emotions in the data subject, and the problem with it is that it is a very opaque system, and even the agencies in certain countries who use it, they haven't been disclosed the full data sets and the full technological background of these tools. So essentially, without that, we can't talk about accuracy or bias, because we just don't know enough.
Thank you, Lena. I think that definitely gives us some food for thought in terms of going forward and how we can maybe bring together some of these discussions around accountability and transparency, and indeed, as you suggest, accuracy of these systems and how we can address some of these concerns. Right, so unfortunately, we have come to the end of the panel. I just wanted to thank the panelists and also the audience members for some fantastic questions, which unfortunately we didn't manage to get through them all, but there was some great ones in there. Particularly was one about public space and private space, which I wanted to come to, but unfortunately we have run out of time. So thank you very much for everyone who participated, and yeah, it was a really enjoyable session. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.